My fault. I'm sorry.
We're
There
good.
you go. Okay. We'll start that. I'm Alex Gould, and we're here with Elliot Scrignoli and Sam Saganiak, my two partners, and we'll be interviewing Mr. Wawrzyn today on November 21st. So, Mr. Wawrzyn, you grew up on the south side near 17th and Morgan for most of your grade school, all the way until 7th grade, before moving to the north side of Milwaukee near Good Hope. So what were those two areas like growing up, and how were they different from each other?
The cultural difference was quite stark. The south side of Milwaukee back in the 50s was predominantly Polish American, whereas the north side of the city was predominantly German American. So culturally, it was quite different, although the German Americans and Polish Americans do have quite a bit in common. It is noteworthy on the south side, back in the days when that area was developed, each nationality wanted to build their own Catholic church. So, for example, I was of Polish heritage, and my parish a block away was St. Alexander's. There was an Italian parish just 3 blocks away from that. And there was a German, this was on the south side, by the way, there was a German parish, St. Helens, 3 blocks to the east of St. Alexander's. So notwithstanding the fact that the south side of Milwaukee was predominantly Polish, there were enclaves of other ethnicities.
Yeah, that sounds. And so, so we were just wondering, on a side note, how did you get you told us you had the nickname Fox. So how did you get that nickname?
It was a fraternity nickname.
Oh, really?
That I was sly as a fox.
Oh.
Fraternity brothers gave me that name based upon some activities I engaged in a local pub.
Interesting. Yeah, we weren't sure when you got that nickname, so we were like, maybe we should find out. And so you told us that you and your brother often went to the Braves games in Milwaukee before they moved out of the city. So could you tell us the story of when you got lost after your brother lost you at one of the games when you were young?
It was a capacity crowd, so there was and everybody stayed to the end. It was the last of the 9th home run victory. So there were 50,000 people who all left the stadium at the same time, and many of them were heading for what was then a streetcar line, the number 10 line, which ran over the Menominee River Valley streetcar trestle and then down Wells Street. So there were thousands of people heading for the streetcar, and we just got separated. And I was about 9 or 10 years old and didn't quite understand all the interconnections of the streetcars and buses. So after having been separated, it was, I got on the streetcar, took it down Wells, but then got on the wrong bus, which I think took me to the north side of Milwaukee instead of the south side. So it took me about 3 hours to get home, taking 2 or 3 different bus lines. But I finally did get home. My parents were worried to death, obviously.
I'm sure,
but,
yeah.
And my brother was being roundly criticized for losing his little brother. But anyway, the game, it was a good game.
Yeah, that's good. Makes up for some of it, at least. So more about the Braves. So when they left the city, was there like a significant impact on Milwaukee as a whole?
Oh, no question about it. There was a major lawsuit filed against the Braves, trying to stop them from leaving and going to Atlanta. And the law firm that actually represented the plaintiffs trying to prevent the Braves from moving was actually the law firm that I would later join in 1974, Foley and Lardner. But the lawsuit didn't prevail and the Braves did leave, but it created a real vacuum in the sports community. We had an NBA team also. I believe their name was the Milwaukee Hawks. They left and went to St. Louis. So we lost NBA basketball, we lost Major League Baseball, and which left us only with the Green Bay Packers, three games. Back then it was only 2 games, but 3 games being played at County Stadium, 4 games ultimately being played in Green Bay. So it left a real void if you were a professional sports fan.
Yeah. Was the county stadium kind of a centerpiece of Milwaukee?
For the sports, it was. I mean, the Packers played there and the Braves played there.
Gotcha.
But it's kind of an isolated area. It still is. There's not, when they built Miller Park, there was some discussion of building it closer to the lake so that it would be more like some of the other stadiums where you can have a district with restaurants and other entertainment venues, because Miller Park and County Stadium are quite isolated. There's nothing around that area. They've tried to improve that with they've got some restaurants in the stadium itself, but it still is quite isolated when you compare it to some of the other downtown venues.
For sure. I've never really thought about that, but yeah, that's a good point. So can you tell us, so you had a paper route when you were younger. Can you tell us like something about that? Like, when did you get to the job? Like, what was the route? When did you sell the job or get rid of the job?
I got the job. It wasn't difficult to get a job because nobody really wanted it. I mean, get up at 5 a.m. and get on your bike and deliver papers. The Milwaukee Sentinel was the morning paper. I would say I got the job in maybe September of my, it was when we were on the north side, so I was probably a 8th grader. And I only kept it through the winter. I just remember being quite cold delivering papers in December and January. So it probably was not wise to get it in September and then give it up in March when the weather was getting warmer. I don't recall why I did, but it taught me some work ethic, though, that sometimes you have to get up in the morning if you want to do well. You have to get up early.
For sure. Did you have to buy your own bike or did you already have one?
I had a bike.
Gotcha. So your father, you said was a brewery worker, and he originally worked for Blatz before Pabst bought it over. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So do you remember like him telling you either about his work or like the transition when Pabst bought Blatz? Did he tell you anything about that?
We talked about it quite a bit. I went down to both Blatz and Pabst and saw the operation. He started out as just a line person and worked his way up. He didn't have a college degree. He worked his way up through the hierarchy and into management. And ultimately at Pabst, at one point, he was running the whole operation there from an operational standpoint, not from an executive level, just the nuts and bolts of making sure that everything was running on time on the second shift. They were doing 3 shifts back then. I think all the breweries had 3 shifts. So the breweries were running full steam 24 hours a day. So there was an elaborate network of repairmen, line people, making sure there weren't any defects in the bottles or other problems. So having an operation like that running 24 hours a day nonstop was difficult. And he rose up through the ranks and became part of management, and wasn't really in the union, I don't think, at all. So I
Wow.
was proud of him and did see both operations,
Yeah.
Blatz and Pabst.
Yeah, good for him. That's impressive. And then moving on to your mother, you said that she was an industrial nurse who worked for like companies such as like Millprint, Louis Ellis, and Inland Steel.
That's correct.
Did she tell you about her job at all? You know, what she did?
Yes, and the difference between an industrial nurse and a hospital nurse is like night and day. And of course, hospital nurses are of different variety. You've got the nurses in ICU versus nurses in the obstetric department in a hospital. But an industrial nurse is really kind of unique. Oftentimes, she was the only medical person at the plant. So for example, I remember her telling me about one situation at Inland Steel where one of the workers got his hand crushed and they brought him into the clinic at the plant, which was no more than a little office with first aid equipment. And my mother was confronted with this mashed hand. And until the paramedics got there, she had to stop the bleeding. And there were many types of injuries like that where she really was the first responder even before the quote unquote first responders got there.
Wow. Yeah, that had to be a stressful job for sure. And then more talking about you, besides the baseball games, which you've told us about, did you have any other like hobbies or activities that you would do with your brothers?
Well, I think I mentioned last time we talked stamp collecting. My older brother and I were really involved in collecting stamps from all around the world. And there were services where you could buy these stamps. And I just regret that when we both went away to college, my mother, who was the opposite of a pack rat, she liked to get rid of things and have a clean house.
Mhm.
One day she just threw out all of our quote unquote junk. I just wondered to myself whether some of those stamps we got from the Czech Republic, which was then Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia, all of these remote places that we didn't really know where they were and now don't even exist, whether those stamps would be worth something. Not that
Yeah.
I need the money, but it's just interesting to know what really happened to those stamp books and whether somebody dug them out of a dumpster and still has them somewhere. But we had quite an elaborate collection of stamps.
Wow, that's cool. So today, card collecting and trading different stuff like that is pretty popular. Back then, was stamp collecting kind of the thing that everyone did?
Not really. I think we were pretty unique in that regard. I don't remember any of my friends or any of my brother's friends collecting stamps.
Really, that's
We
fascinating.
we did collect Major League Baseball cards and football, NFL football cards and those sorts of things too. But I think the stamp collecting was a little unique.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then you told us that you played the clarinet in grade school and played for
Correct.
the city orchestra. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I started playing the clarinet because my parents had a good friend who was a professional saxophone player, and they thought that he actually made a living playing the saxophone, traveling around the country. So they thought it would be a good backup avocation, so to speak, in case my college career didn't go where I thought it would go. So I think I was in fourth or fifth grade when they uh, suggested I take clarinet lessons and the free lessons, quote unquote, because my family didn't have loads of cash. They were at what was then called Girls Tech. There was Boys Tech on about 3rd in Virginia on the south side, and there was Girls Tech, where young girls that wanted to get into technical things that not necessarily go to college would go. That was on 18th and Wells, now known as the Rescue Mission. So every Saturday morning, I would take a bus, which was about 2 blocks from our house, by myself to Girls Tech and get free clarinet lessons. And one thing led to the other, and the people that were doing the best in the class got selected to be in the all-city orchestra. And about 2 or 3 years after I started playing the clarinet, we played a major concert at what is called now the Milwaukee Theater. Then it was called the Auditorium, the building that is just southwest of the Bradley Center, which is no longer there. What's that called now? The First Serve Forum?
Pfizer Forum? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And then, do you know, so you stopped about like when did you stop playing the clarinet?
I would say about the same time we moved to the north side of Milwaukee, which would be 7th grade.
Gotcha. From Poland to escape, like the threat of war. You also told us that you were, very close to him. Could you tell us about his immigration to the United States and maybe a little about your relationship with him?
He was from a farming community in Poland, a small town about 80 miles south of Warsaw. And he and his brother in approximately 1910 were being threatened with being drafted into the Russian army. Russia was starting to bulk up its army from neighboring countries in anticipation of the war with Germany, which ultimately became World War I. And my grandfather, Alex, we've got St. Alexander's, we've got Alex Wawrzyn, who came from Poland, and we've got Alex, the moderator. So it seems to be a popular name.
Yes.
He and his brother took a train to the Black Sea and boarded a ship there, which took them to Ellis Island in the New York area. And the total cost for each of them was $45, which was a lot of money back in those days. So they took the ship through the Bosphorus near Istanbul, Turkey, through the Mediterranean, all the way to the Ellis Island immigration intake area near New York City. And he had relatives in the Milwaukee area, so he came to Milwaukee and ultimately married my grandmother in Milwaukee.
Wow. Yeah, that's really courageous just to leave your homeland like that. How did you get close to him? Because you said you had a good relationship with him.
Well, we, like many families, during the holidays, we visit each other. But I think the closest I got to him was when I was a lifeguard and when I had an internship in pharmacy. Over the lunch hour, he was retired by that time. And over the lunch hour, I would go over and visit him. He lived on 905 East Townsend. I still remember the address, which is just 2 blocks west of Kern Park, if you know that area. Humboldt Avenue, WTMJ is in that area, the radio station. So I would go over there. I worked fairly close to that area, both as a lifeguard and as a pharmacy intern. I'd go over there for lunch. He'd make me some soup, and we'd talk about things like his immigration, like his work at Maynard Steel, where he worked most of his adult life as a crane operator.
Gotcha. So now moving into high school, you told us that you first went to Browning High School.
No, that was 7th grade. 7th grade, Browning. That was an elementary school.
Oh, so so my mistake. What was that like? Because wasn't the saying there, no knives, no guns to school?
The first day I got there, I saw this big poster board which said, "Rule for the week, : don't bring any guns or knives to school." That was 1958, just to give you some idea how dangerous the neighborhood was. 76th and Silver Spring, you wouldn't think would be that dangerous, but
Yeah,
it was dangerous even back then. So my parents thought perhaps this isn't the right school for little Ronnie. So they transferred me to Our Lady of Good Hope on 43rd or 41st and Good Hope. I was only at Browning for 3 weeks. And then ultimately I went to Custer High School after spending half of 7th grade and all of 8th grade at Our Lady of Good Hope.
Gotcha. Was that like a common thing to bring, knives or guns to schools, or was that just that school?
Just that school. I'd never even have heard anything like that since. I mean, perhaps they have metal detectors now in schools with the mass shootings that have occurred over the last 10 years, but it was just that school. There were low-income housing developments in that area. Not that there's anything wrong with low-income people. I was one of them. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but it tended to attract, shall I say, some less desirable people, since the rent was subsidized by the city in those areas. I think the housing development West Lawn fed into that school, and there may have been another, Berryland, which fed into that school. So I think that was one of the reasons it was attracting certain people that, shall I say, didn't believe in the rule of law.
Yeah, makes sense. So you went to Custer High, I believe, right?
That's correct.
So what was that like when you attended it?
Well, it was kind of lonely for the first year because most of the people from Our Lady of Good Hope went to either Nicolay, which was nearby, or Brown Deer High School, or a parochial Catholic high school. So I think at Custer, at that point, I think we had 3,000 students. I think we were perhaps the first or second full class. It was a brand new high school back then in 1959 when I started. And with 3,000 students, I probably knew 3 or 4 from grade school that went there. So it was kind of lonely. I started making friends when I started going out for athletics, but when I first got there, it was pretty lonely. And then later on, athletics opened up friendships, as I'm sure you fellas understand. And I got to know some people. So the first year was kind of rough, but sophomore, junior, senior years, it was better as my friendships and network expanded.
Well, that's good. And while we're on the topic, maybe moving into sports, you said in high school you played swimming, track, and tennis, which is a lot, but which of those was your favorite, and why would you say that?
I think swimming was my favorite because I did it for 4 years. And when I started, I wasn't a very accomplished swimmer, but it requires a lot of discipline. The workouts are long, tiring, and I think it taught me work ethic, self-discipline, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Tennis was good. I was on the varsity tennis team, although Custer didn't have much of a tennis team back then. So with all humility, I wasn't a star or anything. I just happened to make varsity because very few people went out for tennis.
Gotcha.
And track was just a kind of a grind.
Yeah.
I didn't like track very much.
Yeah. So then you said at the age of like around 16, you became a lifeguard. Do you think you could tell us about that?
Sure. I guess the thing that stands out the most about it was my first job was at Gordon Park. The park, I think, is still there, but the pool has been demolished. That's on Locust and Humboldt. Again, this was right in my grandfather's neighborhood. But the first day I got there, I went on the lifeguard stand. And of course, we were all taught methods of saving people. There are basically two approaches, the head carry and the cross chest carry. And you're drilled on that, and you have to take a test on it to become eligible to be a lifeguard. So I felt confident, but I was a little nervous. And most people said, at pools, there are very few people that really need help. I mean, most of the kids know how to swim and there's no problem. So I was on the stand for a half an hour the first day, and this little girl came swimming out of a shallow area into my area and lost it. She was going under. I couldn't believe it. I've just got on the stand. I've got to go in there and save this girl.
Yeah.
So within a half an hour, and I did it, and everything worked out fine. But it was quite a shock to be on the stand for a half an hour and use the skills that I'd been taught, but expected not to use very often.
For sure. What are the odds of that? I was just gonna ask, like what was the most memorable experience, experience, but I'm guessing that's it. I mean, wow.
Then I remember the last save I had too. I did this for 5 years, and I was a head guard at Lincoln Park. You probably know where that is, being from the north side. Lincoln Park, it's on the Milwaukee River.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So I was walking along the deck, and this woman jumped into the diving well, and she couldn't swim. She weighed about 350 pounds. And there's one thing you learn as a lifeguard, it's don't ever let them get you in a chokehold, because the first thing they do as you swim up to them is they grab you, they want to hold on to something, and they put their arms around you and squeeze as hard as they can. So as I approached this girl, she was probably about 20 years old, I sensed I don't want to get too close to her. So you're taught to grab their arm and twist it back so you get them on their back, and then start swimming with them holding their head, which is what I did, and everything went fine. But I remember those first and last saves like it was yesterday.
Oh, for sure. Were you paid well as a lifeguard, or were there like ranks that you went up over the years?
Well, I thought it was well, because it was my first real paycheck. Paper route caddying, they handed you cash, and in caddying and paper route, you had to go door to door collecting from the people once a week. So this is my first paycheck. So I thought it was great. I don't even remember what it was, but I think it was probably something like $2 an hour. Now they're talking about minimum wage being 15.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were promotions. In fact, my third year, I was promoted to assistant head guard, so at McGovern Park, which is on 51st and Silver Spring. And that same year, and you usually didn't make head guard until your fourth year, but that same year, when I was assistant head guard, the head of the lifeguard corps, a gentleman by the name of George Teachin, who kind of founded the lifeguard corps in 1948, he would sneak around in the bushes and make sure all the lifeguards were not sleeping, not talking to girls, whatever, and he'd discipline you if you were a quote unquote screw off. So one busy Saturday afternoon with the pool really crowded, I was the assistant head guard, so I was in charge of the pool on that day. I saw him out there. I knew he was there. And my typical routine on busy days was to clear the whole pool and make some announcements about safety precautions. And I was kind of nervous because he was out there and this wasn't something approved. It wasn't in the handbook. I just thought it was a good idea to kind of slow everything down. The pool gets all foggy, and so you can't see on the bottom, and you have to know if somebody hits their head on the bottom and doesn't come up, you got to be able to see the bottom. So it was a way for me to give everybody a break, read some rules, and then let people slowly get back into the water. So I toyed with the idea of not doing it because I knew he was out there, and this guy's a martinet. He's a stickler for procedure. But I thought, well, who could question what I'm doing? So I did it. And he came into the guard room immediately and chewed me out, said I broke the rules, don't ever do that again. Somebody could have gotten hurt going back into the pool. But the next week, because I had shown some initiative and was a quote unquote leader, somebody had left Lincoln Park as the head guard. He promoted me from assistant to head lifeguard in my 3rd year.
Wow.
So I guess the moral of the story is, if you think you're doing something right, go ahead and do it, even if Big Brother's watching.
Oh, for sure. For sure. That's good advice. And then after this, I think just moving into college, why did you choose to go to Madison?
The simple answer is my brother was there, 4 years older than I was. More complex answer is the family didn't have a lot of money, and it was, I think my first year's tuition was $120. And my brother had worked in meal jobs in fraternities and sororities. And so you could, if you didn't have a lot of money, pay $120 a year, and you could get all your food, quote unquote, free if you wash dishes or work as a waiter or other jobs around the sororities and fraternities. So I just saw it as a good pathway for a college career.
Yeah.
The only place I applied, it's not like today where parents take you to 15 colleges around the country. Back then, it was really the only option.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is crazy because I looked, and now like today, it is like 11,000 annually for in-state tuition, and then obviously a lot more out of state. So it's crazy how certain things have changed. And then in your opinion, what was the most interesting thing that happened to you when you were attending Madison?
Boy, that's, I had 5 years of 2 years of undergraduate pharmacy, 3 years of pharmacy school, 2 years of law school. I guess the most interesting thing, if you take all of those years, was my first year of law school, 1969. There was a riot on campus. Perhaps you've heard of the Kent State Cambodian incursion. Cambodia is the country right next to Vietnam. And the President, Richard Nixon, authorized an incursion into Cambodia, which was expanding the Vietnamese War. And the people that were against the war rose up at the university and started peacefully protesting, just like today. Peaceful protests, quote unquote, became riots. People throwing rocks through State Street windows, and the National Guard was called out. I was in my second semester of law school, and I was studying one of the nights where all hell broke loose on campus, and the National Guard was firing tear gas and pepper spray into the crowds. And the law school is located fairly close to State Street, the main drag, if you've ever been there. And I was studying in the UW Law School library late at night, probably about 9 o'clock, when 3 or 4 law students who were also heavily involved in the protest movement came into the library and said they've just been advised that the library is to be closed because the police have invaded the law school library and it's not safe. So they asked me and another fella to leave. And I said, I don't see any police in here. I can see both rooms of the library. They're big rooms. There's nobody in here. What are you talking about? And they said, Well, Professor Finman has told us to clear the library. He was kind of the advisor to this fringe group. Taught, among other things, at the law school, he taught ethics, ironies of ironies. So anyway, I said, well, I'm not leaving. I'm studying and I'm going to stay here. So about 5 minutes later, the lights went off. They pulled the switch. And the UW Law Library is huge. So I stumbled my way out. Next day, I come to classes and there's a big poster board which says full law school convocation beginning at 10 a.m. in the main, the largest lecture hall. So I went to the lecture and all of these, shall I call them left-wing / peaceful protesters / rioters were making the point that the second semester should be called off entirely and everybody given pass-fail grades. If you were really awful, you never went to class, you'd fail. Otherwise, everybody would pass. There'd be no numerical grades. And I'd done quite well in my first semester and I was doing well in the second semester. So I got up and I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, the whole premise upon closing down the school year is that the police entered the law school last night. I was there until the lights went off and there was nobody that I saw in the whole building. So the faculty adjourned the meeting and said they were going to go into a special committee to study whether or not to close down the law school and give pass-fail to everybody. And they were going to have 5 student speakers and you had to sign up immediately. So I walked up and signed up and I got one of the 5 spots. I was going to tell my story, what happened. There was no invasion of the law school, period. I was there from 5 at night until 10 o'clock when the lights went out. And after the people on the other side of the argument saw that I had signed up, they said, well, if I'm allowed to speak at this committee meeting, then they're not showing up either. So the faculty canceled the student participation and ultimately ruled that the semester would go on, there would be final exams. I take a little credit for that, although who knows what the faculty would have done, notwithstanding my participation.
Well, good for you. Yeah, that's a good story. Was college your first time away from home?
Yes.
So was it pretty hard? Did you get like homesick at all, or was it fine?
Not really, because my brother was there, and I think I told you I moved out of the dorm after about 2 weeks and into my brother's fraternity house, which was right on the Lake Mendota. They had a beautiful pier right on the lake. So I didn't do too well that first year simply because the camaraderie and the social atmosphere was too enticing vis-a-vis studying all the time. So I don't recommend fraternity life for freshmen at UW Madison as a good way to get good grades.
All right, I appreciate the advice. Actually, the next question was actually, did you join any fraternities or clubs? So do you think you
Yeah, I immediately joined that fraternity, Delta Upsilon.
And what was Delta Upsilon?
That's the name of the fraternity, yeah. It's a nationally recognized fraternity.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry, I was a little confused there. So why did you end up studying law and pharmacy? Like, what led you into that?
Well, pharmacy, again, my brother, he was kind of a role model for me. He was in pharmacy school, so I found it. I liked chemistry, I liked math, did well in both, so I thought it was kind of a natural for me. I toyed with the idea of going into medical school, but I was never much into blood and guts. And like my mother said, crushed hands aren't very appetizing. So I thought pharmacy, I could use chemistry, math, and yet avoid the personal contact with patients that I really wasn't very fond of.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, so how did you get your internship at St. Joseph's Hospital, I believe it was?
Well, this sounds like a broken record. Again, my brother interned there. So he
Gotcha.
introduced me to the nun, the sister. Back then, St. Joe's was run by a group of nuns, and he introduced me to the sister who ran the pharmacy. And because he had done such a good job, they thought they'd hire me. And then later on, after I married my wife, she was in pharmacy school. She actually interned at St. Joseph's also. So we had, in a sense, not three generations, but three levels of different interns there.
Gotcha. And this next question is kind of based off the one um, 2 questions ago, but was there any other reasons of why you decided to become an attorney after your law school?
You mean
the
after
exact-
pharmacy school?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I loved politics and read about the political parties a lot, and the conservative versus liberal. And in all honesty, I've been a conservative since I was 8 years old, I think. So I was always fascinated, though, by the political process and how people get elected. And I thought law school would be a natural way into politics. So while I was in pharmacy school, when you're in pharmacy school, you have an option of, I believe there were 3 options. You can take the retail option, where you take courses in retail drugstore type of work, hospital pharmacy, where you emphasize what it would be like to be a hospital pharmacist, and research, where you emphasize more lab and experimental. And I went to the one of the assistant deans and told him of my interest in politics, and said, instead of taking these other options, could I take an option that really isn't available to most people, but could I start taking courses in, for example, business law in the business school, and other courses like constitutional law in the political science department? And to this guy's credit, I don't know if you could do this today, he said, that sounds like a marvelous idea. Yeah, I'll waive the requirement that you have to declare a specific one of these 3 options, and you can take all of these elective courses in the field of law. So I took constitutional law, I took business law, I took a course called public utility law, and there may have been one other I'm leaving out, but in any event, so I had a pretty good base as I prepared to take the LSATs and go to law school.
Wow, that's fascinating. After law school, can you tell us what firm you worked at and how did you get the job there?
Well, when I was in law school, I always had the idea, if I didn't go into politics, which as I read more and more, I realized it was one of the dirtiest businesses in the world and probably wasn't for me. I thought, if I don't go into politics, what am I going to do? I've got a pharmacy background and a legal background. How can I combine those so that I can do something useful and be attractive to the community on the outside, the people that might want to hire me? And there was a professor at UW Law School by the name of John Stedman, who taught patent law. And during his course, I got to know him quite well, and actually did a special paper for him on the intersection between patent law and antitrust law. It seems like the two don't intersect, because a patent gives you a monopoly, whereas the antitrust law was to prevent monopolies. So how do the two combine? How do you make sense of those two? But he told me he actually worked for a Senate subcommittee on antitrust, where they had hearings on those subjects during the 50s. And he knew a fellow very well at the Department of Justice who ran a unit of about 12 attorneys, and that's all they did. Actually, all they did is sue drug companies, alleging that the drug companies had misused their patents to violate the antitrust laws. So Professor Stedman, excuse me, arranged for me to have a phone call with the head of this patent antitrust section. And I had the interview on the phone only, and he said, you know, you would really fit in well here. We're suing drug companies. A lot of the lawyers we have, they don't know that much about the drug industry. You've worked as a pharmacist. You understand the drug industry. He said, as far as I'm concerned, you've got the job. Well, there was this thing called the Department of Justice Honors Program, very hard to get into. And when you interviewed at the law school. They'd have somebody from the Department of Justice come in and interview. And so he said, make sure you got the job. Just do the interview. So this pompous guy from the Department of Justice interviewed me, and he said, you know, somebody like you, you're barely in the top 10% of the class. We're not going to offer you a job. He said, this is supposed to be a half an hour interview, but you're wasting my time. Basically kicked me out of the interview. So I called my friend who'd offered me the job. He said, don't worry, this guy's a second-year lawyer at the Department of Justice. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So I got the job, and that's how I got the first job out in Washington, D.C., in the patent section of the antitrust division.
Gotcha. And then how did you end up moving back to Milwaukee for your job?
Well, there's one thing about working for any government bureaucracy. It's slow, it's inefficient, and kind of really difficult if you're, let me put it this way, an achiever. There are a lot of lifetime attorneys at the Department of Justice, and this goes for the other agencies too, who are there for the rest of their life. They're not going to leave. They're promoted every year. They get a nominal inflation plus kicker on their paycheck. They have tenure, basically. They're never going to leave. I was getting frustrated working with some of those people. In particular, one guy, I was doing a grand jury investigation. One of the things my section wanted to do was to put a patent lawyer in jail, because when you get a patent, you and the inventor have to swear that you're the sole inventor. And things had gotten kind of loose, so I was investigating with a grand jury whether or not a particular lawyer had committed fraud in the patent application. And one of the assistant attorneys, who was the assistant head of my group, started battling with me because I started the grand jury in the District of Columbia, where the patent office used to be located. It was located there in Washington, D.C. at the time the potential defendant committed the fraud. In the interim, the patent office moved across the Potomac River to Alexandria, Virginia. Well, this bureaucrat started writing memos to the head people across the street. We were in a building across the street from the main justice building, accusing me of malpractice for starting the grand jury in the District of Columbia. And we hadn't charged the defendant yet. This process took about 9 months to unfold. And finally, the main Department of Justice people said, I was right. The grand jury should have been impaneled, as I did in the District of Columbia. He was wrong. But in the 9-month time where we were fighting back and forth with memos, the statute of limitations had run on this particular violation. I give you that as one example of, you asked me a simple question, why did I leave? It wasn't only just that, but it's things like that that frustrate you if you're an achiever, that you were right, but it took so long to get the final resolution that the reason for doing it had evaporated.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And so the other day we had talked about a few stories, a few cases that you had. when you were an attorney. And so I was just wondering, before we go into those, would you like to have like a couple minute break, just get some water or something, or do you want to keep going?
I'm fine. Let's keep going unless you have to break.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So the first one, you mentioned that you were kind of part of the case on the Watergate scandal. So could you tell us like what your role was and how it played out for you?
Perhaps you misunderstood me, or perhaps I didn't state it accurately. I wasn't part of the team that worked on the Watergate scandal. My first attorneys general both went to prison. The attorney general is the head of the Department of Justice. I didn't have anything to do with any of that. It's just that they committed crimes in covering up the break-in at the Watergate apartments, and for that reason went to jail, or prison, I should say. But I didn't have anything to do with that.
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Do you think maybe you could expand on that story of what you just said about why they went to prison for that reason?
Well, it was, as I suggested, it was part of the cover-up. What happened is, it was only a week before I got there in 1972. The Republican National Committee decided to hire some people to break into the Democrat headquarters to do some quote unquote opposition research in the wee small hours of the night. I think it was 3 a.m. So they broke in, and a policeman saw the door where they broke in with a tape to the trigger which closes the door so that it wouldn't lock and they could get back out. And so he investigated, found these people, they arrested them, and Richard Nixon was the president. He claimed he never authorized the break-in, and perhaps he didn't, but the reason Nixon finally resigned before he was impeached was that Nixon had a recording system, which was finally, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ordered his recording system produced, and it showed that he was covering up his administration's involvement in that crime. So as part of that cover-up, the Attorney General was involved. The first Attorney General that went to prison was his name was John Mitchell. His successor was a gentleman by the name of Richard Kleindienst, who also was implicated in the cover-up.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry, I was a little confused there. Yeah, that makes sense. And then another interesting case that you told us about was when you helped to save a family cheese business in Green Bay. Could you tell us about that case?
Yeah, the company had been sued by Schreiber Cheese, which is a large cheese operation in the Fox River Valley, distributes their products nationally. And Schreiber had sued 6 or 7 other small cheese companies, alleging that all of these cheese companies were infringing Schreiber's patent on a particular processing machine that wraps single slices of cheese, which was becoming very popular. Everybody was doing it. And a lot of the cheese that you find sold as these single slices, they'll be sold under brand names. Of course, you see Kraft, but they're also what are called private label, where they're sold under the name of the grocery store where you buy it. So in any event, these smaller companies were servicing those private label companies. And as I say, allegedly were infringing Schreiber's patent. We were the last of about 7 small cheese companies. I say we, my client, the last of about 7 cheese companies that were sued by this big major cheese company, Schreiber. Schreiber was represented by a Chicago law firm which specialized in patent infringement suits on behalf of plaintiffs. So when my small client got this summons and the complaint asking for $5 million in damages, if my recollection is correct, they were distraught, to say the least. They didn't have $5 million. If you sold all their assets, it was just a ma and pa operation. They probably couldn't come up with $1 million. So they were going out of business. They called Foley and Lardner, the biggest firm in Wisconsin. They asked for somebody that knew something about patents. And so I drove up to Green Bay, and as I walked in the front door, the receptionist, who I didn't know at that time was the daughter of the president of the company. When she found out who I was, she broke into tears and said, "I hope you can do something. My family is distraught. We're going to lose the business. There's nothing that we can do. We're in your hands." So I spent about 6 hours interviewing various of the employees and a former employee of Schreiber, the people that had sued my client. And I came up with the idea of alleging that, and this took me back to my days at the Department of Justice, a patent may give you a monopoly, but you can't do anything you want with the patent. You can't abuse the patent. So I came up with the idea of doing a counterclaim, which is basically a fancy way of saying a complaint starts the suit. The defendant who's been sued can countersue the plaintiff and say, "I may have done something wrong, but you did something wrong also." So I came up with the idea. I said, the only thing I can think of is if I'll come up with this antitrust counterclaim, I'll call the Chicago law firm, I'll tell them that I'm about to file this, and they may not want that counterclaim being made public because of these other 6 lawsuits. All these other small companies are going to piggyback on our counterclaim, and they may be, the plaintiff, Schreiber, may be blown out of the water. I said, it's a long shot, but it's the only thing I can think of, because they said, well, we can't really pay your bill very long. We can't go through a 3-year litigation fight. So I did just that. I called the Chicago lawyer, and he said, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No, I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to file this next week." He hung up on me. He said, "I'll be back to you." He called back in about 10 minutes. He said, "We're going to dismiss the suit." And I said, "Should I send you the counterclaim?" He said, "Don't send me that damn thing. I don't want it in my file."
Wow.
So that was the end of the lawsuit. Family was grateful. And as I said, the total time from my first meeting with them to the settlement probably took a month. Very little in legal fees because it was over and done with before it even started. But it's one of the more gratifying things that I did. A lot of times, even if you win lawsuits, by the time it's over, you've billed the client so much that they don't feel like they won.
Yeah.
So that was very gratifying to me after doing this for 40 years.
I'm sure that's very impressive. And in the last case that you told us about in the pre-interview was one where you represented a few of the Green Bay Packers players in the 1960s. Do you think you could tell us about that case too?
Yeah, actually, the lawsuit was in the 80s. These were Packer players, stars from the 60s. They were plaintiffs. They had lent money to one of their colleagues' restaurants. They were known as the Left Guard restaurants. Fuzzy Thurston was the left guard of the Packers during the glory years, the 60s, where they won 5 national championships. The right guard was Jerry Kramer, who's written a number of books about the Packers. Fuzzy was the left guard, and he started these restaurants around Wisconsin. And there was actually another, I think there was a left end restaurant started by Max McGee, if I'm right. But in any event, a number of these Packers, when Fuzzy Thurston's left guard restaurants were having financial difficulty, lent Fuzzy's Lifeguard restaurants money. And as part of the deal, one of the shareholders in Fuzzy's Lifeguard restaurants guaranteed repayment of the loans. That is to say, if the corporation went bankrupt, this shareholder, who had more money than the corporation, would stand behind those loans and pay off the Packers. Well, the Lifeguard restaurants went bankrupt. And so this lawsuit was a suit to enforce those personal guarantees that this gentleman had signed. And it attracted a lot of press attention during it was a 3-week trial. 3 Packers involved: Paul Hornung, Ron Kramer, and Willie Davis. And there were other plaintiffs involved suing this guarantor for payment of the monies they had lent to the Lifeguard restaurants. After 3 weeks, the jury returned a verdict in favor of the Packers. The case went up on appeal, was affirmed on appeal. Then the guarantor went into personal bankruptcy. So a lot of people think after you win a case, a 3-week jury trial, the money flows. Not necessarily. First, they appealed, and the jury verdict was affirmed. Then he goes into personal bankruptcy. Still don't have the money. So I came up with the idea in bankruptcy court of filing a separate complaint against the bankrupt, alleging that he committed fraud in connection with his bankruptcy. And if you can prove that, and I had some evidence to prove it, or I wouldn't have alleged it if I hadn't. If you can prove that, then his entire bankruptcy is voided and he can't go through bankruptcy. So after that, we had a number of negotiations, and he claimed he had no money, but he came up, some angel must have lent him something, because he came up with substantially all the money owed to the Packers and the other people.
Wow. Wow.
So it was a good outcome, but it took a long time to get there.
Yeah, for sure. That's fascinating. So then moving on past your law career, how did you meet your wife?
As I said, she was in pharmacy school with me. She was 2 years behind me. I was in the 3rd year of pharmacy school. She was in the 1st. And this is a true story. She came up to me. I was talking to a friend of mine and pulled out a cigarette, said, "Do you have a light?" And I could be quite obnoxious in those days. So I said to her, "I hate people who smoke." Those were the first words we uttered to each other.
Wow.
Now, 50 years later, we're still together, but I can't say it was love at first sight.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I had never smoked.
Oh, that's a great
I,
thing.
I took one puff of a cigarette, tried to inhale it, and almost choked. And I said to the person who gave it to me, "Why would anybody engage in this stupid activity?" So I really did feel pretty strongly about smokers.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
then later, I ran into her at a pub in Madison, and the conversation was more congenial.
Gotcha. And then you said that all of your sons went to Marquette High, and
All went to Marquette High, all went to UW-Madison, and all met their wives, including me, at UW-Madison.
Wow, that is cool.
So we don't have much variety. We just do the same thing.
Yeah, but was the decision to go to Marquette High, was that theirs, or was it more of an influence from you?
It was a group decision, and I don't recall ever having any real discussion about it. It was always just, "You're going to Marquette," and they said, "Great," and that was that. And I must say, one of the greatest things about it was that our first 2 boys were a year and a half apart. So they were, in terms of grades, were only 1 grade apart. So I used to take both of them in the morning. I'd drive into Marquette, then drive down to the First Wisconsin building, and then pick them up at night. And those half-hour sessions we spent in the morning and at night sometimes were pretty argumentative and frothy, but I think they were valuable in us getting to know each other, because you're sitting in a car for half an hour, and unless you just agree not to talk, you have to talk.
Exactly.
I still remember one session. We'd always go down Lake Drive to I-94 and then I-94 to 35th Street, 35th to Marquette. And my eldest son was perhaps a little more aggressive than the second son. And one particular morning, they were fighting like cats and dogs, as the expression would go. And I started about Silver Spring and Lake Drive saying, this has to stop. You know, they were just screaming at each other. And so finally, about where Pandles is on Lake Drive, I stopped the car and told my eldest son to get out. He could find his own way to Marquette. So that was exciting. I drove a couple blocks and then doubled back and picked him up.
Wow, I'm actually surprised. My mom's told me that before, but I've never actually ended up getting out of the car. Incentive was more there. And then just the last question for this interview, I was just, in your opinion, do you think Milwaukee over the years has developed for the better or for the worse?
Oh, that's a tough question. I know it's changed very significantly. It's gone from 5 brewers and large manufacturing businesses, Ellis Chalmers, Square D, Harnischweger, the list goes on, to a service-oriented economy. And if there's one thing I'd have to say is I love Milwaukee, still do, always have. But especially for young people, if you want to stay in Milwaukee, you have to have your sights set nationally and internationally. A lot of the cases, which we haven't discussed, that I worked on in the patent area took me to Munich, Germany, Hanover, Germany, London, England, Birmingham, England, all around the world. And a lot of that revenue that I was earning in those venues was coming back to Wisconsin. So my best advice, if you want to take advantage of Milwaukee and stay in Milwaukee and live in Milwaukee and be successful in Milwaukee, is you're not going to be able to do the kinds of things that were done a couple generations ago. You've got to find a way to develop your intellectual property, your personal knowledge, and look nationally and internationally at opportunities to make yourself unique in the eyes of potential employers out there in the world and the nation.
Yeah, that's some great advice. Well, thank you so much for giving us your story. It was fascinating. And thank you also you gave us a lot of advice throughout it. And so I think we have a lot to think about. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us.
Okay, I enjoyed it. And anytime you want to talk further, give me a ring.
Thank you. And then,
Okay.
Mr. Wawrzyn, when would be an opportune time